Now,
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
It's Friday. We made it. First Friday of August, second day of that month. It's 5:07. Thanks for tuning in here to O'Connor and Company. Happy to be a part of your morning routine. 6:35 brings us Enya Krivine. She's the senior director for the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. She's actually in the Middle East right now. We'll talk about how things have escalated there. 7:05, Peyton McNabb. She is an ambassador with Independent Women's Forum. You'll remember Peyton's story. She was the high school volleyball player who got spiked with a volleyball in the head. She still has brain injuries from that, and the spike, of course, was delivered from a young man playing as a woman. We'll get her reaction to yesterday's fiasco at the Olympics. And then at 8:35, we'll round things out with Brett Baer, Fox News Channel. I'm Larry O'Connor alongside Patrice Onwuka.
Happy Friday, Larry. Happy Friday, everybody. We made it.
It is a happy Friday, indeed. And, you know, I'm so excited to talk to your colleague at Independent Women's Forum, Peyton McNabb, because this, we're all still reeling from the imagery of the women's boxing match yesterday. This developed and unfolded yesterday morning. Mercedes and I were sort of watching it during the show and just sort of amazed. I said multiple times, this is a turning point, I think. This is either the end of women's sports, as we are forced to accept this as the norm now moving forward, or this is the beginning of saving women's sports, that this will be such a critical image, that this will be such a turning point for people to finally realize the disaster that has been introduced to our culture by allowing men who identify as women, for whatever reason, to be able to compete in a sport, especially a sport as brutal as boxing. Listen, I've always been sort of outspoken against the idea of women's boxing anyway.
Really? Okay.
Well, just because listen, the women who box, I know women boxers who box at the Naval Academy, and they love it, and it's great, and it's good for their training to become Marine Corps officers. I get that. What I'm saying, as a viewer, as an audience member, I just hate watching women hit each other. And I was absolutely repulsed. I mean, I was sick to my stomach knowing that this is a man landing punches, and I'm supposed to be watching this as some kind of sport. And I don't know, as we look at the fallout, and there's much to say about this, but I'd love to get your reaction to it as well, Patrice, in terms of what the larger significance of this moment was at yesterday's Olympics.
Well, you know, I think it's now made this issue unavoidable. You can no longer run from it. You can't turn a blind eye to it. In men participating in women's sports, you could pass it off when you look at sports where there's non-contact, where there's no contact between contestants, between people, whether it's, in swimming where they're running in two different lanes. Suddenly you're in a situation where women are physically being in contact with men in high intensity sports, where now it's not just unfairness, and by the way, it's totally unfair, but now it's a matter of safety. And when you see this young woman crying, saying she had never been hit so hard in her life, you might be a woman who has been in or seen a violent relationship where you are the victim of that, and now you think about that. Oh yeah, there's nothing fair about a man punching a woman. You may just be a woman who wants to stand up for women's rights and women's safety, and you can't deny that this is a issue of safety on top of being an issue of fairness. So I really do hope that this does become a watershed moment in the movement, because in the past, organizations like ours have been laughed off. Oh, this is not a big deal. This is just a bunch of high school girls who feel like they're not going to get an Ivy League scholarship. No. There's the scholarship component, but now we're talking about the safety component, and that is undeniable.
It's all things combined. I mean, if it were just fairness and access to a scholarship and entrance into a college, that should be enough.
It should be enough, sure.
Under how we understand. Yes, under basic ethics and morals, not to mention federal law known as Title IX. But then when you add to it, of course, the physical safety part of it. But then think of this. I thought Riley Gaines has told the harrowing story of what it was like to have to disrobe in a women's locker room with Leah Thomas, a fully intact 6-foot-plus man right next to her. This is a safety issue as well, but it's also a psychological issue for women. I'm old-fashioned, but I think women shouldn't expose their naked bodies to men unless they give consent to do that. I also don't think that women should be forced to see a naked man unless they have consented to do that. But these organizations, they push through that. Say, we don't care what your feelings are. You'll be in this room with this naked, fully intact biological man. And I thought of this yesterday.
Yeah.
After that moment in the boxing ring, Patrice, I hate to go there, but after that sad, horrific, and frankly, for her, she must have felt somewhat humiliated that she was forced to go in and compete on such a unfair playing field against a biological man. Yeah. And to add insult to injury, after that competition and after she dropped out and after they raised that man's hand up in the air as a champion, they had to go into the locker room together into the same space and disrobe. That's what happened next. This is the entire package surrounding the nightmare of allowing men in this bizarre cultural experiment, all meant to affirm people who obviously have some mental or psychological block that keeps them from relating to the way they were born, in an effort to affirm them and make society feel great about themselves. We are injuring people in such horrible ways, and I'm so ashamed of society for doing this.
Really quickly, Larry, when we think about the principles at play here, now we're starting to see two really big cultural principles, going in contrast to each other. They're competing against each other.
Yeah, they're butting
There's
heads.
this idea of inclusivity and this idea of fairness. And very often it seems like, well, equality means that there should be room for both. And we're starting to see that, this idea of inclusivity is not making room for fairness. And it's not making room for safety. And it's not making room for morality or ethics. And so the question is, what are we going to let win out? Right. The so-called idea of inclusivity, or all the other values that, frankly, I think most Americans would prize a little bit more highly, like safety, like fairness, like equality.
Yeah, I hear you. The problem is we've warped the language because this isn't about equality. They're not equal. No matter how much you try to change the rules and change reality and change language and change in basic instincts, a man is not equal to a woman in this respect. That's why we have men's Olympics and women's Olympics. So if you're an athlete who was born with XY chromosomes and have high levels of testosterone, if you compete with the women, it's not equal. It's not fair. So
it's not
those
fair.
who are saying, oh, well, you're against equality if you don't want this. No, actually, you're warping the definition of equality.
Of what equality should be, exactly.
What equality is. What equality is. That's what women's Olympics, women's sports is supposed to be for people who were born as women.
That's right.
So
That's right.
Equality is not this person from Group A gets to pretend to be Group B. That's not equality. That's all right. I've got more, and you got to hear what NBC did here. NBC, who owns the rights to the Olympics, I want to tell you what they've done to try to propagandize this issue. I'll give you the statement from the Olympics Committee on this. And also, to bring it home, let's talk about domestic politics, because what appears to be the growing consensus around what will be the Democrats' ticket for president, Kamala Harris, and her potential running mate, they both are on the record with regard to this issue of men playing in women's sports, and you need to know where they stand. We'll get to that, too, in just a moment. First, though, it's 5:15 WMAL traffic and weather every 10 minutes, first on the fives, with Jamie Witten in the Hadid Carpet Cleaning Traffic Center. All right, let's just be clear. Kamala Harris, and as far as I know, the entire Democratic Party and everyone on the Democratic ticket, that means Tim Kaine in Virginia running for re-election as senator, Every Democrat, led by Kamala Harris at the top of their ticket, supports the policies that led to this man punching this woman in the face at the Olympics yesterday. There's no two ways about it. That's where they stand. Donald Trump has been very clear in every speech I've seen of Donald Trump this year. He makes a point to come out and say, we are ending this policy. And the Biden administration, the Harris-Biden administration, has actually proposed changing Title IX to make this federally mandated across every state. Thankfully, good news yesterday, another appeals court struck that down thanks to a lawsuit that an Independent Women's Forum, Patrice's organization that she works with, along with Julie Gunlock, have championed. Then there's Josh Shapiro. Josh Shapiro is now rumored to be Kamala's running mate. She's supposed to make an announcement on Tuesday in Philadelphia. The presumption is that it'll be Governor Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania. Well, Governor Josh Shapiro vowed to veto a ban that was making its way through the Pennsylvania state legislature that would have protected women's sports and kept biological men from competing. In other words, Governor Josh Shapiro specifically proactively went out of his way to prevent the legislature of that state from keeping the conditions in Pennsylvania from allowing a man to punch a woman in the face in a boxing ring like you saw it yesterday. In fact, here's Kamala Harris in 2019 bragging about her record as Attorney General of California. Listen to this.
With the power that I had, I used it in a way that was about pushing forward the movement, frankly, and the agenda. And so look at my record to know. When I was Attorney General, I learned that the California Department of Corrections, which was a client of mine, I didn't get to choose my clients.
Right, a client of the Attorney General.
A client of the Attorney General, right, of the Office of Attorney General, that they were standing in the way of surgery.
For prisoners.
For prisoners. And there was a specific case. And when I learned about the case, I worked behind the scenes to not only make sure that that transgender woman got the services she was deserving. So it wasn't only about that case. I made sure that they changed the policy in the state of California so that every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access to the medical care that they desired and need.
So she went out of her way to use, I love how she says, look how I used my power. I always get freaked out when politicians brag and use words like I used my power. She ensured that men could be in women's prisons. And by the way, if you've been paying attention, 5 years after she made that statement, and 8 years after that policy was enacted, women are getting sexually assaulted in huge numbers in California state prisons, and it's because of Kamala Harris using her power that way.
Well, if you go to IWF, our website, we have a series of female inmates who have been assaulted, who sexually assaulted by male inmates, claiming to be women. Listen, Kamala Harris has always said that California needs to be the leader and the model for the rest of the country when it comes to these policies. Frankly, every policy. But this one is pernicious. And to expect her to do anything other than try to nationalize this type of policy is something that should alarm everyone. Whether you're a one-issue voter, I hope this could be your issue. I'm sure there are plenty to choose from. But just thinking about what this kind of heinous behavior, this kind of heinous policy would be, both not just in prisons, but when it comes to every single sex space you can imagine, women's shelters for women fleeing abusive relationships with their children, again, opening those up because of the policy rewrites. And so, I know we IWF, we've been, pounding the pavement and bringing together the handful of other left-leaning feminist groups, and by a handful, I mean counting on probably one hand, but who join with us arm in arm to say this is wrong. Whether you're talking about sports, you're talking about transgender policy in schools, you're talking about in prisons, in women's shelters and spaces, it is all wrong, and we need to bring some common sense and some fairness to the conversation. So, Kamala Harris, don't tell me about supporting a woman and she's the first female president if this is what she's going to do to women nationwide.
If you think it's wrong for a man to pretend to be a woman and then punch a woman in the face in the Olympics, then you should vote Republican. Because that's what the Democrats support, that's what they stand for, and they'll support it and keep it going here in the United States of America. Republicans will stop it. The Algerian boxer presented one statement after this controversy. 8 words: "I'm here for the gold. I fight everybody." Oh, that's ladylike. The International Olympic Boxing Committee said that everyone has the right to compete. Ugh.
They just don't want to qualify where.
And the policy is if the government issues a passport that says woman, then as far as we're concerned, you're a woman. This boxer, everyone says this boxer's been disqualified in the past because of XY chromosomes. This boxer's also been disqualified in the past because heightened levels of testosterone, which are manifest because of the XY chromosomes, because that's the biological definition of a male. Also, if you're looking for this video, because a lot of people were passing it around yesterday on social media, you're going to have a hard time finding it because of all of the videos of the Olympics out there. NBC Sports has cracked down with their copyright protections on 2 videos. You can see Katie Ledecky winning the gold. You can see Simone Biles nailing it on the vault. You can see videos of the Olympics that really make you feel great. But if you're looking for the video of the opening ceremony's last summer abomination, or if you're looking for the video of the man hitting a woman in the face in an abomination of women's sports, you'll be hard-pressed to find it because NBC Sports has forced everyone on social media sharing that video to remove it lest they lose their account due to copyright infringements. And that's not about copyright. That's about a political agenda.
Censorship.
That is. It's 5:12. We've got more on this topic this morning. It's one of those touch point cultural moments that transcend politics and really will make a difference in people's lives. And coming up at 7:05, Peyton McNabb, a female athlete, a teenager who was affected by this very policy. She joins us at that time.
Now,
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
It's 5:37. Thanks for tuning in to O'Connor and Company. We got you covered all morning long here as we finish up again another historically busy week in the nation's capital and around the world. Coming up at 6:35, Enya Krivine. She's with FDD. She's going to give us the latest on the tensions in the Middle East. At 7:05, Peyton McNabb with Independent Women's Forum talk about men competing against women in sports and how dangerous it is at multiple levels. And 8:35, we'll wrap things up with Brett Baer. I'm Larry O'Connor. That's Patrice Onwuka. Good morning, Patrice.
Good morning. Happy Friday, everybody. Whew.
Yeah, happy Friday indeed. Yesterday, this story broke as we were on the air. We told you that the Wall Street Journal reporter, Evan Gershkovich, 32 years old, who was arrested in 2023 in Moscow while reporting. Actually, he was reporting on a trip to the Ural Mountains. He was arrested in Russia, accused of espionage, recently convicted, and sentenced to, I believe, 16 years in prison. He was released along with a handful of other alleged spies that the Russians had arrested, including Paul Whelan, by the way, a retired Marine who has been in custody for many years, since 2018, I believe. This is a person who everyone, Brittany Griner, they moved heaven and earth to get the WNBA basketball player out who was arrested for marijuana possession in Russia. And she sort of was brought in front of Paul Whelan. There was a lot of complaints about that. Why are we going after the WNBA star instead of the Marine who's being held? That said, Paul Whelan is now free, too. This is all good news. We're glad, although we're still waiting to hear the details of this deal and exactly what Russia got. Because, again, as KT McFarland said yesterday, all of these hostile nations have learned lessons that you take an American, you hold them hostage, you're going to get something in return, and you end up getting something in return. Joe Biden, who we're told is still the president of the United States, addressed this issue in front of the media yesterday. Here's cut 2. See if you can make out what he's saying, because his speech has not gotten any better with all the rest that he's had.
During the transition, I instructed our national security team to dig into all the cases of hostages being wrongfully detained, which were inherently, we inherit them from the prior administration.
Yeah, the fact is, Robert O'Brien, who had been the ambassador in charge of releasing people held around the world under the Trump administration and then become the national security advisor, he actually did a hell of a job cleaning out a lot of these people, including the Christian ministers who were being held in Turkey that people said would never get released. Multiple people. It's just a slanderous, disgusting lie to say, oh, this is Trump's fault. One of the people was apprehended during the Trump administration in 2018, and negotiations began immediately. Joe Biden's the one who decided to get a basketball player out before getting that person who he inherited from the Trump administration.
Yeah.
Trump inherited a bunch of these prisoners from the Obama administration. It's so despicable to start pointing fingers in that way, but that's who Joe Biden is, always has been.
Well, yeah, it's not surprising. First off, I'm so happy and relieved that these prisoners have been released. I mean, watching Evan Gershkovich hug his wife, greet his family, for doing nothing other than his job, which was to report on what's going on in an opposition country. It's a testament that, it's a reminder that there's still hostages out there, American hostages, and I'm thinking of the ones being held in Gaza right now, and I'm hopeful that the Biden administration can secure their release. I'm hopeful that the next administration can secure their release, and all of those who still need to be held need to be released. That, and then the next question is, okay, so who did we trade? Who did we swap in exchange? And there's always going to be the tough question of weighing the pros and the cons of giving up an dangerous arms dealer for an WNBA basketball player.
Yeah.
Right. Obviously the families will say, I'm willing to trade whomever. But the American government and the president has to take a bigger view, right? And so you begin to wonder, okay, well, who did we give up for these hostages?
I don't know if the Brittany Griner thing. I don't think it was a tough decision. I think it was all politics. They made it a priority because enough people in the liberal press was making a big deal out of it. And she had a famous name, and there were people who, and so because look at the way they reacted afterwards. Look at how Biden, celebrated it and specifically
brought her wife to the
audiences. That's right.
The White House.
This was it was all about politics and about imagery. And yes, of course, our heart breaks for these people, but of course, Joe Biden yesterday had to make it. When he's the empathizer in chief, right? He once again had to make it about himself. He couldn't just let the agony of these families stand for itself and let them have the dignity of their loss and their anguish. No, he had to glom onto it. Here's cut 3.
And having lost family, not a different way, and not knowing what's happening, the circumstance when they're accidental, the health, it matters.
Yeah, no, that's at that moment he just needed to be quiet and leave the attention on the families who've been reunited, not on himself, not on his family.
Donald Trump put out a statement. I'll read it to you. So when are they going to release the details of the prisoner swap with Russia? How many people do we get versus them? Also, are we paying them cash? Are they giving us cash? Please withdraw that question because the answer is no. Are we releasing murderers, killers, or thugs? Just curious because we never make good deals at anything, but especially hostage swaps. Our negotiators are always an embarrassment to us. I got back many hostages and gave the opposing country nothing and never gave any cash. To do so is bad precedent for the future. That's the way it should be, or this situation will get worse and worse. They are extorting the United States of America. They're calling it a trade complex. That's so nobody can figure out how bad it is. A reporter yelled a question to Biden because, of course, he doesn't take questions formally, saying that Trump has repeatedly said he could have gotten the hostages out without giving anything in exchange. Here's Biden's response.
President Trump has said repeatedly that he could have gotten the hostages out without giving anything in exchange. What do you say to that? What do you say to President Trump now, former president?
Why didn't he do it when he was president?
Sir, what did you
And again, Dana Bash, by the way, on CNN, are we going to? Okay, we're going to do more on this. I'll let you hear what Dana Bash said to that in a moment. It's 5:44.
Hey, it's Chris Plant. Find out what the media don't want you to know. Coming up this morning at 9, right here on WMAL.
President Trump has said repeatedly that he could have gotten the hostages out without giving anything in exchange. What do you say to that? What do you say to President Trump now, former president?
Why didn't he do it when he was president?
Sir, what did you say?
Yeah, why didn't he do it when he was president? That's his response to Donald Trump saying that he could have gotten these hostages out without getting anything in exchange. All right, now, I just told you that during the Trump administration, they got out a lot of people. You talked to Ambassador Robert O'Brien. That was his job before he became National Security Advisor, and I've interviewed him multiple times about all of the people that were being held against their will, either as political prisoners or what have you. That's what they did. It was a huge success under the Trump administration. CNN's Dana Bash thought Biden had a great moment there with that.
Why didn't he do it when he was president?
Sir, what did you
I think that was what they call a mic drop moment at the end there. Why didn't he do it when he was president? What a historic moment. Watching and listening, President Biden now
the gushing. They're just so in love with Kamala now that they've decided that it's going to bleed over. Since Kamala won't actually address the media or answer any questions of the reporters, they're just gushing over him too. Can we just get to the facts here? I'm sorry, Dana Bash, that you don't deal with facts. Only one of these hostages from yesterday is a holdover from the Trump administration. Paul Whelan, he was taken in 2018. The rest, how exactly is Trump supposed to have released Evan from when he wasn't even president when he was taken? They were taken while Biden was president. It's a nonsensical reply, and of course the facts support the idea that Trump was very successful in getting people out. But this is why people hate the media and Dana Bash. Oh, mic drop moment. Forgot. I guess Dana's having her own brat summer right now.
You listen, it's kind of interesting to see Dana Bash suddenly rediscover her love for Joe Biden, because for the past 3 weeks, leading up to maybe last week, everybody hated Joe Biden in the media. They were doing their very best to push him out because they didn't think he was capable of being the next president of the United States. And now that he finally grudgingly stepped aside, now they're willing to embrace him, which just demonstrates that the media looks at these folks as pawns, as useful for their political ends. And right now, the political end is to embarrass President Trump, and whomever they can use to do it, they'll do it. So, listen, at the end of the day, that takes attention off of where the attention should be, which is, yes, I'm really glad we have the release of these prisoners. And by the way, how many American prisoners, hostages, are still being held by Hamas right now in Gaza? Right. And I would love to have had them ask, what are you doing about the hostages in Gaza? That's the kind of question they should be asking.
Yeah, the question is not, Trump said this. No, the question is, what about the Americans being held right now? You don't ever mention them, let alone do anything for them. Yes. And one wonders if one of these hostages wasn't a reporter and a member of the media, and so reporters are putting a lot of pressure on Biden, whether he would have moved heaven and earth for them out of Russia. Last night, they made sure that Vice President Harris was part of the scene that was captured on video, of course, at Joint Base Andrews as the hostages were freed. And listen on Cut 8 here, as Biden was asked, what's your message to Vladimir Putin? This is going to sound familiar to everyone.
What is your message tonight to Vladimir Putin?
Stop.
What's your message to the Americans?
Stop what? I think that's the best reply. Stop what? This is exactly what he did with Iran. Don't. And, of course, they did, and they still do. I'm just so tired of this, man.
I think he thinks that's a sign of strength, just to be very brief in his remarks. That is not strength. No, that just sounds like you forgot what you're saying, and you just stop, and then you forgot what you were going to add.
It reinforces the fact that he can't get past a one-word answer to something without a script or note cards. There was some suggestion that Kamala Harris was very much involved. I don't know who floated this one out, but it was flying around. Kamala had a lot to do with this. Kamala has her fingers on the... They certainly got her in the photo op, right?
Yes.
National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan was asked directly about that yesterday.
You've discussed, obviously, the president's involvement, direct involvement in all of this. Can you talk us through any involvement that the vice president had? Was she also speaking directly to other leaders and allies?
So, as I said in my opening comments, both President Biden and Vice President Harris have made the return of unjustly detained American hostages an absolute priority. And in this particular case, Vice President Harris actually had an opportunity to engage with Chancellor Scholz earlier this year at an opportune and timely moment at the Munich Security Conference, where she talked about this issue with him. That followed on a conversation that the president had.
Really long
just
answer. It
short
was
time
a simple
before
question, and he can't get to it. The answer is no. She didn't have anything to do with this. And he goes meandering around until he finally gets to it. Would you like to hear what Kamala Harris finally was unscripted? You know, every appearance that she's had and everything she's said.
All right. Let's
to
hear what
the,
she
this
says,
is it.
unburdened by what has been.
That's
hear it.
correct. And no, unburdened by the teleprompter, unburdened by the Hollywood script. She was finally speaking off the cuff yesterday about this glorious moment. And I'm going to play it for you here. Listen.
This is just an extraordinary testament to the importance of having a president who understands the power of diplomacy and understands the strength that rests in understanding the significance of diplomacy and strengthening alliances. This is an incredible day.
There you go. Let me can I repeat that for you? Yeah, I need you to get.
I'm like trying to follow it.
You
with
speak
Venn
Kamala,
diagramming.
don't you, Patrice? Yeah.
I can try and translate. I'll do my best.
It's an extraordinary testament to the importance of having a president who understands the power of diplomacy and understands the strength that rests in understanding the significance of diplomacy.
Talking matters and understanding that talking matters. That's my translation.
I'm gonna wait for the Venn diagram to make it
I'm
clear
trying to draw it out. Maybe I'll put it up on on social media.
It's bottom line. We're thrilled that these Americans have come home.
Are.
We're thrilled for their families. We're worried about our foreign policy. It's 5:53.